Sophia's mobile vibrated on the nightstand as if it was in a hurry. It wasn't unusual for her to leave it off silent mode with the screen facing down, as if that was enough to hide it. I was awake, not because of romantic insomnia or premonition, but out of habit. I always wake up when she moves. That night she had turned over twice with her body tense, without reaching for me. When the phone vibrated, she didn't even open her eyes. She stretched out her hand, brought it to her chest, and covered it with her palm, as if the device was an animal that could give her away. I stayed still. I didn't make the automatic gesture of asking who it was. I didn't even breathe louder. I waited for her hand to relax. A few seconds later, she put the phone back on the nightstand, but not where it was. She put it closer to her. That detail seemed absurd to me, and at the same time definitive. I sat up just enough to see the screen lit for a moment before it went off. I didn't see the name. I saw the message, and that was enough. Tomorrow we repeat. Don't be late. You still owe me. The time, the tone, the tomorrow. It wasn't a joke or an office conversation. What I felt wasn't a blow. It was a kind of practical emptiness, like when you open a drawer looking for something and it's where it shouldn't be. I didn't reach for the phone. I lay staring at the ceiling, doing a quick inventory of the last few weeks. As if my head needed to justify what I just read, the endless meetings that had started to become normal on Thursdays, the calls cut off when I entered the kitchen, the change in voice, less I'm running late and more don't wait up for me, the new lingerie that suddenly appeared stored at the back of the drawer with the tags cut off, the 6 a.m. gym that used to make her lazy, and above all the way she touched me lately, as if I were a hygienic obligation and not a husband. I waited for her to breathe deeply in that sleep pattern she has when she's no longer pretending. Then I did it. I carefully picked up the phone, unlocked it with the code we had shared forever. I didn't feel guilty. Guilt needs a pact. And by then, the pact was already broken. I opened the conversation. The name was saved as Aichu. B. No need to guess. Hector Valdez, her boss. The same one who at the company Christmas dinner shook my hand, without looking me in the eyes, and spoke to me as if I were an escort. I read backwards. There were deleted messages, yes, but not all. There were short, direct phrases without affection, orders disguised as desire, promises of I'll pick you up in the garage, photos I didn't open, reservations for Imperial and Suite 118, and a voice note from her that I didn't listen to. The text was enough for me. She wrote as if I were an obstacle, not a person. He suspects nothing. It's routine. You stay calm. I put the phone back exactly where I found it. And I got up, went to the bathroom, washed my face, and looked at myself in the mirror. I had the expression of someone who has just learned of an accident and still doesn't know where it hurts. On the shirt that Sophia had left hanging on the bedroom chair, I saw a long, blonde thread that wasn't mine. On the collar, there was a smell that wasn't from our house. Expensive cologne, clean, too confident. I remembered a tiny lipstick stain on the edge of a glass 3 days ago from a colleague, she said. I remember a hotel receipt that I saw by chance when emptying her bag and that she took from my hand with a cold smile and a that's work. None of this was work. At 6:10 a.m., I went out into the street with mental excuse. I need air. I sat in the car and opened the bank app. Small, repeated charges in places I don't frequent. Downtown parkings, taxis, a restaurant she never suggested we go to. I saved screenshots, emailed them to myself, made a folder in the cloud with my name and a new password. I wasn't thinking about revenge. I was thinking about evidence. When one finds out late about a reality, the first thing one learns is that truth, without backup, turns into argument. At 8:32, I called Ruben from the work parking lot. There was no long silence, and then he, without drama, confirmed what I already feared, that Hector had a history, that she wasn't the first employee, that he moved with impunity because the business group was his, and because it suited people to look the other way. Ruben didn't say, "I'm sorry," as one says out of obligation. He told me something worse, to take care of myself, that this guy didn't lose when he played. I hung up and stayed for a while with the phone in my hand. I felt the pain organizing itself into something else. It wasn't calm, it was focus. That day I entered the office as usual, greeted as usual, did my work as usual. On the outside, I was still the predictable husband. Inside, I was already in observer mode, and Sophia, without knowing it, had just turned me into someone who was no longer going to ask for explanations. I was going to watch, save, and wait for the exact moment. The message came 2 days later, a Thursday at 13:18, when I was eating alone in a daily menu that tasted like nothing. It wasn't a save number. There was no greeting, just one sentence. If you know about Hector and Sophia, I also need to talk to you. Cafe Molino, 1830. Don't bring anyone. I stare at the screen with that feeling of stepping on ground that doesn't yet know if it will hold. I didn't reply right away. The first thing I thought was that it was a trap. The second was that if it was a trap, I was already in it since 2:47 that early morning. I looked around as if the people in the restaurant could have something to do with it. No one was looking at me. No one looks at a man with a normal employee face. That was in fact one of the most constant thoughts those days, how invisible one can be even to oneself. At 18:23, I arrived at Cafe Molino. It wasn't a discreet place. It was a central location, with small tables and people coming and going, perfect for any conversation to dissolve in noise. I chose a table from which I could see the door and also the reflection in the glass. I had learned to look without seeming to look. It was ridiculous, but I was already used to this new way of being in the world, as if everything could be evidence. Valeria Valdez entered at once. I recognized her from press photos and from the kind of elegance that doesn't need effort. What surprised me wasn't her appearance. It was her expression. She wasn't coming to demand explanations or cry. She came with the face of someone who has been accepting a truth for months and has passed the shock phase. She sat down without asking, placed her bag on the table with precision, and looked at me as one looks at a necessary procedure. There were no preliminaries. She told me her name, as if I might not know it, and left me a thick paper envelope. Inside were printed copies and a USB drive, photos taken from afar. Hector with Sophia entering a hotel, leaving a car, stopped in a hallway. Screenshots of reservations, dates, room numbers, call logs, a report with the letterhead of a private investigation firm, all organized, without drama, like a file. In one corner of each sheet, there was a watermark with the date. Valeria wasn't improvising. She had been building this for a while. While I looked, she spoke in a low voice, without pressing words. She explained that Sophia's thing wasn't a slip. It was a routine, a pattern of Hector's. The difference was that this time the woman was from the company, and that opened another door. Not just infidelity, also hierarchy, pressure, dependency, advantages, and punishments. Valeria didn't use the word abuse with moral emphasis. She used it as a legal label. She asked me what evidence I had. I told her little. That I had started late, that I was gathering charges, receipts, routes. She asked me to show her later. Not there, I nodded. I realized that she wasn't coming to save me or form a sentimental team. She was coming to add pieces. And I, though it bothered me, was a useful piece because I was external to Hector's circle, a normal husband without a surname, without power, an accidental witness. Then she did something that still seems to me a calculated cruelty. She took out her phone, searched for an audio, and played it very low, bringing it just close enough. It wasn't heard perfectly, but it was understood. It was Sophia's voice. I recognized it by the S that lately escaped her even at home. She said things about me, not loose phrases, a whole block of practical contempt. She called me predictable routine, a good guy, zero problem. She spoke of me as one speaks of a piece of furniture that doesn't bother. And Hector in that recording laughed, not like someone nervous. He laughed like someone who confirms that the world works in his favor. I didn't feel a stab. I felt something else flatter. The certainty that my marriage, as I had understood it, had been a useful version for her. And the worst is that I had collaborated. I had accepted the role of the man who doesn't ask too much, who understands work, who trusts because that's what you're supposed to do. I realized that the betrayal wasn't just the sex. It was the contempt. The rest is noise. Valeria put away the phone and said, without raising her voice, that she didn't want a domestic scandal. She said that gets bought, covered up, and rewritten. What she wanted was to force them to expose themselves in a place where they couldn't control the narrative, with executives, clients, press, and people used to smiling while listening. She spoke of the Valdez Group's spring gala at the Grand Hotel Imperial. She explained that Hector needed that gala. It was his showcase, his altar. Their photos were taken, deals were closed, alliances were defined. There, if something broke, it broke with witnesses. The plan she proposed was simple in appearance, that she and I enter the gala together, not as theatrical lovers, but as two people who are where they shouldn't be together. Enough to trigger the rumor, enough for Sophia to react, enough for Hector to lose control. Valeria wasn't looking for me to pretend to be someone. She told me that my advantage was precisely not being anyone to them. They won't see you coming, she said. And that phrase hit me wrong, because it was true. I left the Cafe Molino with the envelope in my backpack, and a strange mix of shame and decision. In the car, I opened one of the photos again. There was Sophia with her hair up entering the hotel with a coat that I had given her. She didn't look nervous. She looked comfortable. And that detail finally settled the cold rage inside me. That night at home, Sophia told me that on Saturday there would be a company dinner and that she would probably arrive late. She said it without looking at me while removing her makeup. I nodded and pretended normality. In the bathroom, when I closed the door, I leaned on the sink and breathed slowly. In my head, there were no longer questions. There was a list. And for the first time since 247, I felt that I was not alone in the ugly part of the truth. The next day, I started what Valeria called with dry irony, preparation. It wasn't changing my soul. It was changing what others see. I booked an appointment to get my hair cut. I took out of the closet the suit I wore to weddings. I bought a new shirt, not to please, to not look like the man who could be ignored easily. I even practiced a posture. Shoulders back, calm gaze, unhurried step. They seem like nonsense until you understand that power feeds on details. And while Sophia continued with her routine of excuses, I continued with mine, which was more dangerous. That of someone who learns to wait, not out of cowardice, out of strategy, because the blow wasn't going to be in a kitchen or a bedroom. It was going to be where it hurt them most, in front of their own people. Saturday, we arrived at the Grand Hotel Imperial at 20. I know, because I looked at it in the car and memorized it like someone pinning a tack on a map. Valeria didn't speak during the ride. Neither did I. It wasn't a comfortable silence. It was a functional silence. We had reviewed the essentials twice. Enter, walk without hurry, greet just enough, stay in visible areas, not look for anyone, let them find us. At the door, there was discreet control, guest list, bracelets, an official photographer with logo backdrop. People move with that artificial confidence of company events, suits, dresses, identical smiles. Many faces I recognized from afar. Dozens where I was the husband of this time I wasn't behind. I walked at the same height as Valeria. I noticed the first reaction before seeing it. The drop in volume of some conversations. It wasn't total silence. It was an adjustment, like when someone opens a door and cold air comes in. Inside the main hall was large and too brightly lit. High tables, waiters with trays, screens with videos of the Vault Group. I recognized executives I only saw in articles and local politicians who always appear in photos cutting ribbons. It was the kind of place where no one wants a scene because a scene has memory. I was surprised how quickly the news spread without anyone saying anything. Looks that go from Valeria to me and back to Valeria. A greeting to her that stops halfway when they realize who I am. An eyebrow gesture, a hand touching an arm, a phone that appears and disappears as if casual. I repeated to myself inside that I wasn't there to prove bravery, but to hold position, not retreat. At 217, I saw her. Sophia was near a sponsor's table in a black dress I hadn't seen. She was laughing with two colleagues, but it was a surface laugh. When her gaze crossed mine, her face froze for a second. Then she did something that felt familiar to me. She straightened her back, adjusted her expression, and walked toward me as if the hall was hers. I'm not going to reproduce what she said word for word. It was brief and it was venomous. The essential was that she asked me what I was doing there and with whom I came, but the subtext was different. Who do you think you are to be in this place? I noticed with an unpleasant clarity that my presence worried her less than Valeria's presence at my side. Sophia had never had problems with me. With Valeria, yes. Valeria was power within her world. I didn't answer her with a speech. I said something neutral, just enough not to give her a foothold, and that was the first break. Sophia expected me to act as always, to ask for explanations, to get upset, to beg for a private conversation. By not doing so, she had to improvise. Her voice rose a little. Not shouts, but that tone that can be heard 3M away. Several heads turned. Hector appeared 2 minutes later. I saw him before he approached by how a small aisle opened in his path. He was a man used to people moving to let him pass. He came with a host's smile that didn't reach his eyes. He put a hand on Sophia's arm as if to calm her, and then tried to do the same to me on the shoulder as if I were a nervous employee. In that instant, I understood everything physically. Control wasn't just words. It was contact, space, hierarchy. I stepped back half a step, not abruptly, but decisively, and there another piece broke. Hector isn't used to having his body withdrawn. Valeria intervened without raising her voice. It wasn't a scene of a wounded wife. It was a short phrase that changed the air in the hall. She said something like, "This isn't about jealousy, it's about employees." That word in plural was a key. She wasn't talking about Sophia as an unfaithful woman. She was talking about Sophia as a subordinate. She was talking about pattern, abuse, company, responsibility. I saw the chain effect. An executive stopped smiling and looked at another. Someone from communications took out their phone discreetly, as if checking the time, but was recording. A local journalist, whom I identified by his professional curiosity face, got a little closer with that cold attention of someone who smells a headline. A couple of guests who before pretended not to see, now did see. Sophia tried to recover. I noticed because she became rigid, as if her body wanted to return to the script. She said something to save herself, but it contradicted what she had already let show with her reaction. In her hurry to deny, she confirmed. Inside, I didn't feel triumph. I felt a kind of bitter clarity. The fall isn't a blow. It's a set of small imbalances that suddenly no one corrects. Hector changed tactics. His smile hardened. He tried to take the conversation to a corner, talk it privately. I saw how he sought to regain control of the space, but it was already late. In those places, the private exists only if everyone agrees to pretend. And that night, for the first time, I noticed that some were not willing to pretend for him. I stood still next to Valeria, holding the gaze without challenge, without visible fear. Not because I was brave, because I understood that the real blow was that the untouchable felt observed, that power, even if for minutes, panicked in front of his own people, and that Sophia, upon seeing me there, understood something that I had taken months to accept, that I was no longer going to occupy the place of, invisible that she took for granted. Sunday at 7:06 in the morning, my phone started vibrating nonstop. They weren't congratulations or innocent curiosity. They were alerts, screenshots, links. The Santa Lucia newspaper had a photo of the gala on the digital front page. Valeria and I entering. Sophia turned toward us with her face half gesture, and Hector behind with that expression that was neither anger nor smile, but failed calculation. The headline didn't talk about romance. It talked about internal investigation, improper conduct, and possible abuse of power. That choice of words gave me a strange feeling. For the first time, the story wasn't written by them. Sophia arrived home at 9. I knew by the sound of the key and by how she closed the door hard, but without slamming. She entered the living room and saw me sitting, dressed, with the laptop open and a cup of already cold coffee. She wasn't coming to apologize. She was coming to control damage. She spoke quickly, in that tone she uses when she wants to turn a crisis into a practical conversation. She told me that I had ruined her career, that Valeria had used me, that Hector was a complex issue, and that the best was not to make more noise. I looked at her without arguing. What surprised me was my own absence of hope. I didn't ask her why. I didn't ask for truth. The only thing I told her was that I was going to talk to a lawyer, and that from that moment on, anything important would be in writing. That same afternoon, I called a firm recommended by Reuben. I requested an appointment for Monday first thing. I gathered what I had: bank screenshots, the hotel receipt, charge photos, shared car location history, and the material Valeria had given me. I made copies on a pen drive and another in the cloud. It wasn't paranoia, it was learning. What before seemed exaggerated to me now seemed basic. Monday at the office, I noticed a change in the air. People didn't ask me, but looked at me with a strange respect, mix of morbidity and prudence. At 11:12, I received a call from a hidden number. No need to reproduce it. It was Hector or someone speaking for him with that polite threat tone that those who believe fear is a procedure use. He hinted at inspections, problems, consequences. I hung up without responding. Then my hands shook, but not dramatically, physically, like when the body understands before the head that you are in danger. The inspections arrived that week as promised. At my job, internal audits appeared. Questions about procedures, expense reviews, schedule reviews, all legal in appearance, all targeted. They found nothing because I didn't give them anything. Still, the message was clear. They could inconvenience. What they couldn't was go back what was already out. The Valdez Group issued a statement on Wednesday. They spoke of zero tolerance, review process, precautionary measures, words that sound good on paper, but the important thing was what leaked afterward. The board would have formal investigation, and Hector was temporarily sidelined. Temporary, they said, but in Santa Lucia, temporary means we're letting go of your hand without saying it yet. Sophia lost her position before the end of the month, officially restructuring. In practice, no one wants a woman who appears in headlines next to a falling boss. I saw it in her face when she signed the severance and arrived home with a cardboard box. She didn't cry. She accused me. She told me that I was vengeful, that I had set up a circus. I listened to her as one listens to someone who is no longer talking to you, but to themselves. She asked me to fix it if I could. There I understood her coldness for real. It wasn't lack of remorse. It was inability to see the damage as something real if it didn't affect her. The divorce started with papers, not with shouts, with dates, with inventories of assets, with discussions about who kept the car and who paid what. The saddest part was the smallest, deciding what to do with things that before had symbolic value, and now were just objects. A photo album, a coffee maker we bought together, a cheap painting from a fair. I saw myself classifying life as if it were a move and realized how easy it is to erase years when there is no longer respect. Hector tried to resist, but the domino continued. Clients who left, rumors of lawsuits, leaked internal emails, names of other employees that started circulating in low voices. After a few months, his relocation became public. External consultant, far away in Puerto Cabra. For someone like him, that was exile, even if they painted it as a new challenge. I saw his photo in a small note and didn't feel joy. I felt closure. With Valeria, there were no quick promises. There were long and planned conversations, as if both of us were allergic to pretty phrases. We moved to a simpler apartment, not out of poverty, but out of need for silence. She decided to create a foundation to support victims of workplace harassment, not as an image gesture, but as a way to turn shame into something useful. I joined with what I know how to do. Organization, numbers, logistics, constancy. Sometimes people ask me if it was revenge. I don't call it that. Revenge sounds like cruelty. What we did was refuse to continue being extras, recover respect first inside, and then in what we let others do to us. Sophia, for her part, moved forward with a more austere life, without the shine she used as a shield. She never asked for forgiveness. I don't know if she ever understood, and sincerely I stopped needing her to understand. The only thing I needed was to get out of that role of invisible and not return.